All right. Welcome to Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. I'm your host, Stephen Robbins, joined currently by co-host and fellow immigration attorney Matthew Archambault.
Yeah, you let me in on an introduction. Like it.
You know, our Patreon numbers are really taking a dive. We're hoping for that coronavirus V recovery. So if you like this show, which obviously you do, that's why you're listening to it right now, you should go to patreon.com/redirect and make a little contribution. It pays for the hosting. And we have a beautiful, beautiful producer.
Yeah.
Pretty soon in the future, we're all just going to talk like Trump. Everything's going to be beautiful, strongly. Like, look at things strongly. That is not English, right?
Yeah. And for Patreons, if you don't like the show, the more you contribute, the sooner we can get the hell out of here and stop doing it. So I think that's an incentive.
Yeah. So we talk about lots of things today. I do want to call you out real quick. And you hate long intros, but you're participating in this one. So you've been talking about getting the hell out of here. And so you sent me this website that's like how to immigrate abroad, right? And it's all these how to get a green card in Moldova or whatever. But all of these places, all of these options are like hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, who do you think you are taking off like that? You know, you're going to just leave the rest of the poors behind like me?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Once I figure it out. But it is like depressing though. You look because, there are options if you have the financial wherewithal to get out. And I do look at people who actually have a good amount of money and wonder like, why are you still here? But if you look at the regular Joe, it gives me more admiration for our clients, right? People that will come from Honduras. And now we do have a lot of our clients will come here and they'll have family here and they'll already have connections, right? Mm-hmm. But I have a lot of clients who have nothing here. They have like a friend of their cousins, lives in Philadelphia, and that's their connection that they're relying on.
Right.
And they come here and they have no idea what's going to happen. And when we talk about like going to other countries, like now, okay, let's kind of get the coronavirus thing out. And let's say all the borders are open. Having a U.S. passport, you can pretty much go anywhere. And we could pick up and fly or drive over to Canada and stay there. Fly to Spain or France or Germany, wherever we wanted to go for the most part, get into the country and stay and not come back. But then it's like, well, what do you do? Well, how do you work?
Right.
And like all these things that our clients just say, okay, it's intolerable in my country. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to go to the United States and I have no idea how I'm going to work, how I'm going to live, how my kids are going to be. I'm just going to do it because there is better than here. And it takes a lot of courage. And I think lots of times we overlook the courage that it takes. And when we think about what's happening and what could possibly happen in the near future and our desire to maybe not want to be here, and we think about, okay, maybe I can take off to Spain, but how do I do that? How do I do it so I'm safe and I could live my life? And it's a scary thought.
Yeah. So we've put our heads together and our 401ks, LOL. And what we've decided to do is Matthew and his family, they're going to get Moldovan citizenship. And I'm going to fly to Moldova and I'm going to be his undocumented housemaid. So
yeah,
it's kind of a perfect situation. But anyhow, folks, don't flee the country just yet. We need all the good people, good righteous people here fighting the good fight for now. And plan your fleeing, I guess, for a little bit later. Give this country a little bit more time.
So we're not really going to talk about that. What are we talking about today?
In the meantime, become a patron at patreon.com/redirect.
So me and Stephen can flee.
Segue.
Trust me, we can do this show from anywhere.
Folks, we need 15,000. No, wait, how much was it? I think the cheapest one was maybe Moldova. It was like $150,000.
Yeah.
So folks, we need $300,000 to move to Moldova. Become a patron today.
And we promise you, if you do become a patron and we raise that money, we'll actually figure out where Moldova is. So,
oh, come on. Oh, what are we talking about today? We're talking about all kinds of fun stuff. Fascism.
Yeah.
Forced hysterectomies. I mean,
why it sucks to be an immigration lawyer.
Why our lives are terrible right now. It's a real mood lifter. Hopefully, it's a beautiful Saturday afternoon. When you're listening to this, the sun is shining, you're out doing work, and you just get a real, we're going to call this episode the mood boost. Straight to the veins.
Yeah.
Enjoy the show, and we'll talk to you again next week, Matthew. Let's have a preliminary chat. Is there anything in particular you want to talk about besides
that this was the worst week?
Literally fleeing the United States.
This is like the worst week of 2020. And that's kind of saying a lot.
Well, I mean, why?
I don't know. I think, the whole Ruth Bader Ginsburg dying thing.
Oh, yeah. She did.
Remember that? Yeah. I think it's just like.
Was that this week?
Yeah, that happened earlier. I think
was that a Friday thing?
Saturday, maybe? Sunday.
This stuff normally happens Friday after we record, but we didn't record last week, so.
Well, it just emphasizes like how kind of we are.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
I mean, a lot of this stuff hopefully can be reversed, right? But a Supreme Court justice can't be reversed. And also, by the way, she was a great woman, would have been a great historical woman, even if she never got onto the Supreme Court. And I think it would be a sad day, a big loss, regardless of when she passed.
Right.
Whether she died when Trump was in office or Biden or Hillary or Obama, it's going to be a big loss. But now?
Yeah. Let me ask you something because okay. I've noticed some people finally coming around to the F word. Like, hey, he's talking about maybe like not doing an election and maybe doing the election but ignoring it. And this is starting to seem weird. But I was going through some of my stuff and I found I made a poster. I was going to post it around town, right after the election. And it's got Trump's face and it says, fascism isn't funny. He's making a funny face, right? And I don't want to I'm not trying to gloat that I called it. It's a really depressing thing to have called, but I'm wondering if immigration lawyers were particularly well situated to see some of this coming because of what we do. Because I don't think I'm that smart politically. I don't know that much stuff.
No, I agree.
Right.
I mean, he always had a fascist tone about him, right? But you're right. Is it being hyperbolic about it that, he's a fascist? And when, quite frankly, a lot of people viewed George Bush in that vein.
Right.
People on the right viewed Obama. And I mean, now they say Governor Murphy in New Jersey is a fascist because he wants everyone to wear masks.
Right.
So.
But I'm not talking about people who are dumb and obviously wrong. I'm talking about
so obviously wrong. Let's keep the dumb part for ourselves.
So, right. A commentator who I love and respect was saying, when we look back, we'll look at it and say, wow, he was fiddling with the post office and there were these signs. But to me, how about during the campaign when he was encouraging people at his rallies to beat up counter protesters, or at the RNC when he said, I alone can fix this?
Well, I mean, the inauguration speech. I mean, what's the name of the inauguration speech? What do they refer to it as?
I don't know, but was it America First Carnage, or something like that?
American Carnage.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. And, so
yeah, I mean, it's hidden in plain view, right?
Right. I do think if this goes a real bad way, I mean, who knows? But the history books will not say, wow, Louis DeJoy, what a turning point. I mean, go back to birtherism, the fact we allowed this person who was totally untethered to reality and facts to just bumble along and say these things and project his intentions. He told Russia on TV to hack the emails of his opponent, which on the left, you're not allowed to care about because Hillary was lame and terrible. And, there's this whole thing about on the left, it's not cool to care about the Russia story. But if Trump had said, hey, hack Bernie's emails. And then days before the election,
Bernie doesn't use email.
yeah, hack Bernie's pigeon courier service in Vermont or whatever. But, then there was a big story about Bernie's emails. It turned out to be nothing, but it was just a major distraction and a sort of a made up scandal. I think people would care about it. But anyways, another big one is the fact that he still has not conceded that he lost the popular vote in 2016. So, is it any surprise that we're getting this same sort of rhetoric? Why would he all of a sudden be like, oh yeah, okay, now I'm going to care about reality when it comes to this election, but not the last one. So all of this seems to have been, like you said, in broad daylight this whole time.
He's doing a classic move, right, of laying the predicate or the groundwork for an excuse, right? And anyone who's ever worked anywhere understands this, right? If you're working and like the next day you want to take the day off, the day before you kind of start coughing and
totally
you start telling the boss, yeah, boy, I'm feeling a little warm,
right?
And
lay the groundwork.
Yeah, and then the next day, like they're like, oh, well, of course, Stephen called out sick. He wasn't feeling well yesterday.
Right, for sure.
And that's what he's doing, but that's what he did before the last election as well.
Yeah, you got to pave the road for your bullshit.
But you're right. His tendency, his lean towards fascism, he's not hiding it, right? Let's say Joe Biden wins and he becomes president. And all of a sudden, he becomes a hardcore fascist. Mm-hmm. People will be like, whoa.
That'd be really weird.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming. Of course, the really, really woke people on the left, would have been, I told you so, man. They're all the same.
They're just the same.
Yeah. But what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to kind of play a little bit positive in this spin, saying, okay, this isn't going to happen. Because one, I could get all stressed out about it. But honestly, what can I do? Seriously. What can we do?
Yeah.
We can go out and protest and we can call people. But honestly, I live in a very blue part. So what am I going to call my very Democratic congressman? I'm going to call Cory Booker and be like, hey, Cory, you should really watch out for Trump. He's like, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do?
Well, I know there are some good organizations that phone bank, that you can volunteer to phone bank. Maybe not in your case, blue, or in my case, red districts.
But seriously, though, if we're worried about fascism, are we worried about the vote? We're not worried about the vote. We're worried about him.
It's going to help our case if the reality is that Joe Biden wins. If the reality is that Joe Biden loses and the facts, point that way, then we don't really have much of a leg to stand on. I think
we should really count on all the good and honored Republicans,
right?
That really respect institutions. Mm-hmm. And all that. And I really think we can lean on people like Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham and Mitt Romney.
Ted Cruz.
Because you know what? At the heart, it's about the Constitution.
Right. I loved Ted Cruz the other day saying, we got to fill this seat because the election. In other words, like you said, the groundwork for a contested election. He's not saying like, well, we got to watch out for these things or we got to be careful about this or that. He's guaranteeing very strongly, very powerfully, that the election will be rigged or fake or whatever. And then Ted Cruz is going out and not saying, well, now hold on, we trust our institutions and we trust the states to get it right. He's saying, oh yeah, this is definitely going to the Supreme Court.
Well, and Lindsey Graham said, if the Supreme Court decides that Joe Biden won the election, I'll accept it. And I'm sure the president will as well. Well, again, that's presupposing that, of course, this is going to go to the Supreme Court. And that's why they're so energized to get Trump's pick on there.
So I wonder if it's going to be like a dumb Bush v. Gore, where like the new justice is citing in footnotes, like, 4chan comment threads and stuff like that. Like, well, a lot of questions about the vote in Pennsylvania. And then they're citing to like Breitbart. It feels like we're kind of headed to something like that. But I don't know. I mean, at this point, you're right. The worrying, the consternation, like, I don't know that it serves anyone. The defeatism is, I think, actually part of insofar as there is a strategy on the part of the Trump campaign. I'm not sure that there is, but, they want us to feel defeated, like it doesn't matter, like we're definitely headed in a certain direction. And it's not an inevitability. So, the question I think was rhetorical. What can I do? But, maybe it's something we need to start asking more in earnest. Like, no, but really, like, what can we do? And I don't know the answer, but on that note,
well,
thanks for tuning in.
Just to make everyone feel better, the worst case scenario is Donald Trump got to pick 3 Supreme Court justices. So.
And hundreds of other federal judges. So that's just the worst. No, the worst case scenario is probably much worse than that. But anyhow, I did a presentation yesterday for an old translation class at BYU. My professor wanted me to talk about, immigration and language and that sort of thing, translation within the immigration world. And one of the students was like, yeah, I really want to do immigration law, but you're kind of a downer. How do you keep going, or is there anything good about what you do? And I do want to say,
no, absolutely not.
That there's not, and you should run while you can. You're young, you have very little student debt. Run as far away. No, like this week we got a green card for a wonderful lady who's lived here virtually her whole life and lived through a very terrible and abusive relationship. And she brought me a big Cesar Chavez flag, which is cool. I'm going to fly that in my front yard.
So she's a commie. So
she's a communist, which we didn't put that on her application. So, but anyhow, there are these things that happen in our lives. We don't talk a lot about it. We tried to for a while. Remember, we were going to share good stories, but
and they stopped happening.
Exactly. But anyways, yeah, we got to every once in a while remember that there's a few good things happening. But having said that, should we talk about forced hysterectomies?
Before we get on to that, I just want to kind of a little insight in what it's like to be an immigration attorney. So I have a BIA appeal that's due on Monday. So I've been working on it, diligently. And a BIA case came out yesterday, actually from the Attorney General, that makes it so I have to kind of like rework the entire brief. It doesn't make my brief better or my client's chances of keeping his asylum that immigration judge granted any better. It makes it substantially worse. And it's just things like that. And it wasn't even a Friday, because normally these like horrible decisions come out on Friday.
Right.
And, it is just like this year of all years. It's been like this during the Trump administration, but it seems like this year, every couple weeks, there's some new, or every week or every day, there's something that changes where you have to like go back and look at what you just did and realize, oh, I have to do it all over again.
Right. Or just, without even looking at, it makes our work product more difficult, which is a concern of ours, obviously, as the backbone of this country, small business owners, as practitioners, people who care about our clients. That's a big deal. But also just we mentioned this before, you mentioned it, every little change, and there's hundreds of them, is carefully tailored to make things worse for the immigrant 100% of the time. It's not like, oh, you know what, there was this weird redundancy, and so we're going to slim down this application to make things just a little bit more convenient for everyone. You would think in a normal administration, even a normal Republican administration, there'd be a couple of those, right? Oh, we're going to streamline this process. We're going to make this a little bit easier. But it's not like that. It's exactly the opposite. And not just things that make things harder, but that don't serve a legitimate purpose. The purpose is making it harder, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So those are like the frustrating things. And we should only say, right, they're frustrating, right? I mean, these are little things that can be life and death. Like I'm sending out an asylum application today for an unaccompanied minor that really has to, because of new interpretations, probably has to be in before he turns 18. And he turns 18 on the 30th. So we're sending it in. And I spent a good 15 minutes going over the application, not to see if it included all the elements of asylum, not to see that we had the facts right, his statement right, and all that, but to make sure all the little boxes were filled in with NA. And if it gets rejected, then, perhaps he loses out on asylum.
Right. Totally fair, totally normal process. Let's talk real quick about, before we get to the forced hysterectomies, which I know is why people are tuning into this episode. They can't wait to hear about that. A good example of this is the new filing fee situation. So a lot of the filing fees are going up in a couple of days. But there was this weird thing where they also added a biometric fee to certain work permits starting on August 25th. But sometimes it's required and sometimes it's not. And it's really weird to be in some of these Facebook groups of practitioners who've been practicing for, I've been practicing almost 10 years. How long have you been practicing?
I don't know.
Okay,
almost 20.
Almost 20. And nobody knows what the proper filing fee is supposed to be.
Yeah, and it's not like it's like all these like dummies like me and Steven. There are actually people on there that are like really good attorneys.
Right.
And some people will be like, say with confidence, oh, this is it. And they'd be like, oh, okay, that's it. And then the next like 3 comments will be like, no, it's not that. And we had probably like 10 of them returned.
Right.
And so I just like want to send them back in because now I understand the fees are going up October 2nd, and I think it's going to be even more. But then also I don't understand about the new 1-year thing, because now applications filed after a certain time needed to have a clock of 1 year as opposed to 150 days. So I don't know how that plays into it. So
I sat through like a 2-hour seminar on these work permit changes these are for asylum seekers.
Remember how we used to make fun of like, oh, yeah, I'm working I-765. Now it's like,
it's like legit.
Like it's going to be like a specialty.
Yeah. I don't think people are all that interested in us getting lost in the nitty gritty, but the important thing to know is in the past, if you're an asylum seeker, you file your application and the law sort of suggests that like we should be able to get your asylum application done in 6 months. And if we don't, then you can get a work permit and you can work lawfully while your case is being processed. And they basically threw that whole thing in the shredder. And now like no one knows what the rules are or what's going on. And it's really terrible. So this is just another example. I mean, big picture, take a step back of all the categories and the types of immigrants you could be picking on. They're specifically choosing asylum seekers to make their lives more difficult or impossible. So,
and quite frankly, and let's not be unselfish, making our lives a lot more difficult,
Right. Well,
my staff was like ready to like revolt. They're like, what the hell? And then, from our perspective, right, you have clients coming up yelling at you like you don't know what you're doing. Like, no one knows what they're doing.
Which like usually is kind of true. But
in this case, we're totally justified.
Totally justified. It's been a weird change because a lot of this stuff, little rule changes here and there, you can kind of like email your staff the change and be like, read this and figure it out. And these are changes that, again, like attorneys on forums are arguing and fighting over things because nobody can figure it out. So
here are the changes, and they're going to change again in like a week.
Right.
Anyways, let's talk about something that's more consequential. Genocide. Yeah.
So this story of a doctor in rural Georgia at a detention center, I guess, right? The story broke after a whistleblower blew the whistle and said that this doctor was performing large numbers of forced hysterectomies on immigrant detainees who either didn't know or didn't understand what was going on. The whistleblower, Don Wooten, claimed that the doctor was known as, quote, the uterus collector. And so this story came out, I don't know, maybe a week and a half ago. And a lot of people ran with sort of, this is Stephen Miller and this is Nazi genocide. And then there was a very quick pushback from a lot of our colleagues saying, well, no, this guy has some sort of history of medical fraud or insurance fraud. And this is actually a fairly common practice to overperform unnecessary surgeries or whatever just to collect the money. And this is a doctor who doesn't have genocide in his heart. What he has in his heart is just pure love of filthy lucre, right? It's not all those Nazi things. It's just American capitalism. And I don't know like which one's more depressing. I think they're like the no, relax. It's just this other thing. If you really look at it closely, is also terrifying and very depressing.
What they're trying to come out and saying like these are kind of like isolated. I think ICE is saying that they only have 2 reported cases, and so there is this one side that will say like, let's slow down. Let's not like overhype this because maybe it's really nothing, and I guess it looks worse if you overhype it. But from my perspective is one, I don't believe anything that ICE says or people who run these types of detention centers, what they say. There are so many allegations or findings of fraud against this doctor. I don't think he's that credible as well. So hopefully, I think, people like Andrew Free are out there trying to get to the bottom of what happened. And I think in this circumstance, I would rather people overreact because underreaction in here, typically what happens in these stories, and I'm not all that convinced it won't happen here, there'll be a congressional hearing or 2, and then nothing will really happen. And let's say it's just kind of an isolated thing there. If people kind of blow it over, then it's more apt to happen other places. And, taking out a woman's uterus against her will isn't like, oh, whatever. That's a pretty big deal if it happens to one person,
Right. And also, like, at the end of the day, I don't know that it matters, like, necessarily what was in the doctor's heart of hearts. I'm sure there were Nazi doctors who, like, didn't consider themselves particularly anti-Semitic or whatever. They were doing it for research purposes or, whatever. I don't know that it necessarily matters, but I do think that...
For the pension?
The pension, they were close to retiring. And no, but the brake pumping, like I totally understand. Let's get to the bottom of it. Let's let the facts come through. And there were some allegations against the whistleblower for having also allegedly mistreated detained immigrants. And so, those facts should come forward. I did notice one issue I have with brake pumping in general is that so many of these immigration changes are small that a lot of the reaction that comes out is brake pumping. Because, for example, with the presidential proclamation saying that our unemployment is so high with COVID that we're going to bar certain immigrants from coming into the United States, that was first portrayed on social media as an immigration ban, that he's ending immigration. And then a lot of really smart people came along and said, no, it's only these categories and there's certain carve outs and everyone's overreacting. Why is everyone overreacting? Well, I've got a client who's been stuck in Mexico since March because of the presidential proclamation. And his family doesn't care that there were carve outs and this and that. They care that he's not allowed to come back until December unless that proclamation gets extended. And so for this family and for many, many others, it is a very big deal. And our tendency for each thing to say, well, hold on, it's actually not an immigration ban. It's actually just these groups and it's not that many people who are affected. Like eventually.
Yeah, I mean, and that ban was and is a big deal, right? And
exactly. Even if it wasn't a total ban. Okay, fine. You won the semantic award.
But the thing is, right, it's the other side. They don't worry about semantics, and they win many times the messaging war, right?
Right.
You know, ICE puts out a press release and they gloat and they say, oh, we arrested 50 criminal aliens and this and that, blah, blah. And if you really look into it, someone on the right that would look into it and go, well, you say 50 criminal aliens, 45 of them were just like illegal reentries. And, you know, there was one who was wanted for an aggravated assault, like 2 that had like DUIs, and one had robbed a bank or something. So, you know, you're really kind of misconstruing the facts. They don't do that, right? And their message is, okay, we had all these dangerous people in our midst that were working and were getting out of the country. So I don't see any reason to spin it for them, spin it for ICE, you know?
Right.
It's a horrific thing that happened. And the thing is, typically with these things, you find out that there was a lot more when we're talking about things like hysterectomies and all that. I'm pretty confident that we're going to find out that it might be a little bit more widespread than they're trying to say it was.
Right. And even if there wasn't like a meeting where the heads of these local agencies got together wearing like Klan hoods and they had a conversation about like, how can we stop the spread of immigrant DNA? Well, let's do forced sterilization. Like, even if that meeting didn't exist, and it probably didn't, this is still very, very bad.
Well, it's the culture, right?
Yeah, right.
Stephen Miller doesn't have to go down to the ICE officers in the field and say, be horrible. He doesn't have to go to CBP and say, be horrible. They understand, right? Though they
said, remember when the ICE union said after the election that they were uncuffed, I think is the term.
Untethered. So yeah, I mean, so it's certainly culture. And I think that's something that we've talked about a lot, how like, oh, Obama was so bad and this and that. And it wasn't great. But the culture within, especially the people at the top that had power over the people that kind of go out and do this stuff, was a lot more immigrant friendly than we're seeing now. And yeah, I know Obama deported more people and all that. You, I mean, seriously, like if you've been listening to us and like you still think that's like a persuasive argument and you still think that paints the entire picture of the immigration landscape, then just stop listening.
Right.
You know,
I don't know that we have a lot of those listeners, but maybe
I would hope not.
Before we go, do you have any anecdotal stories from your own practice? Because one thing that's come out of this is war stories of the sort of healthcare system within the detained immigration world generally, and the picture is not great. Do you have any stories from your practice?
Yeah, I mean, I have many, but the one that kind of stands out was there was this Mexican kid. I say kid, he was probably in his 20s, in detention up in Essex, New Jersey, at the Essex Detention Center. It was up near Newark. And he received a bond, I think, of, I either want to say $7,500 or $15,000. His family couldn't pay it right away, whatever the amount was. And he was complaining of really severe abdominal pains. So he was going to the nurse, the medical center, and at first they were giving him Tums. And then after Tums, I think they gave him some Pepto-Bismol. And it just kept getting worse. And I even talked to people, because I had other clients in there that knew him. They would keep all the immigration detainees in one thing. And my clients were all from Camden, so a lot of them knew each other, so they were friendly. And they were telling me how he was so sick that they actually had to carry him down to the medical. And what the doctor did, and the doctor only came in 2 or 3 times a week, the doctor said in order to combat this pain, he shot a pain-killing agent like Novocaine or whatever it is into his stomach to numb the pain.
Mm-hmm. That sounds like something my 4-year-old would do playing doctor.
And
shot right to the belly.
I think he actually told me that. And I was like, I couldn't understand what he was saying. It wasn't a translation problem or anything. It just sounded so bizarre and stupid. I thought he just wasn't understanding what was happening to him. But it was clear. I was contacting the detention center and ICE and all that, saying, listen, he has to see a real doctor. And they were, no, that's not going to happen. And understand, right, for them to transport him to a hospital, they have to gear up, they have to get the ICE officer, they have to get warden, all these things. I'm sure it's a lot of paperwork. I'm sure it's way too much hassle for these guys. So finally, I told the family, I'm like, listen, you have to pay the bond. I don't think he has time for us to go into like federal court and all that and do all that stuff. And certainly, I think paying the bond would have been cheaper than paying for all that. So they got the money together. They paid it. They picked him up. They drove him right to the emergency room, and they did an emergency. He had to have his gallbladder out. And I spoke to the doctor afterwards, and he had told me that if he had waited another day or so, that thing would have exploded and he probably would have died.
Yeah.
So we got the records from the prison, and we actually talked to the doctor about it because I didn't quite trust his story about getting like a pain shot in the stomach because it just, and I asked the doctor about it and he's like, that's stupid. No one would do that. Like no one. And then we got the records and that's exactly what happened. And we actually spoke to someone about suing and all that. And they're like, it's not even worth bringing because of this and that. And like, what are the damages really? He's fine now. And the lawyer's like, yeah, well, if he had died, that would have been something.
Yeah.
So in here, and I think a lot of the pushback, and I'm doing my air quotes thing, has been typically it's a lack of treatment that we see, not over treatment like a hysterectomy.
Right. That's true.
So I think most of the stories will be lack of treatment. We could put together like 10 episodes of horrifying medical examples.
It's also important, I think, to remember for people to, like, we take it for granted that these people are in detention for a reason. They must be dangerous or so awful and terrible.
This guy had no criminal history.
Yeah, no criminal history. So I had a client who was detained for about 3 years. He got out because of COVID, because he has some health concerns. But he had schizophrenia and, he had some run-ins with the law. But he was finally, for about 3 or 4 months, he was totally clean. He was going to a counselor. He was going to a drug rehab and to his doctor. So he had all the services he needed, good, loving family that was helping take care of him. And things were really, really good when he got arrested by ICE. So again, like not arrested after the commission of some crime, but arrested after he'd gone, several months proving that he could, engage in his community-based care. And then he's treated for 3 years at the detention center by a doctor who doesn't speak Spanish and the client doesn't speak English, but all the medical records say that these conversations are happening in English and that the client is fluent in English, which, he's just not. And then, like, inexplicably, they just said he couldn't have the drugs.
He just didn't want to talk to you.
Right. They told him he just couldn't have the drugs that he had outside. They put him on other drugs, which gave him, he suffered from all kinds of side effects. And he eventually just went off drugs because the side effects were so severe, rather than just put him on the drugs that he was using before. And it's just a bad system. And again, for this particular client, he got into a situation where they denied his case. And then the judge denied bond, saying he's a flight risk because he's not going to win on appeal. And this is the same judge who denied the case. But then we won on appeal. And then we asked for another bond because you denied bond saying we wouldn't win appeal, and we won appeal. And the judge said, oh, that's not why I denied bond. I denied bond because of he's a flight risk for some other reason. And now that he's out, he's doing great. He's once again going to his counselor and his doctor and, spending time with his family. It's just not a person that anyone needs to be afraid of.
Well, it's funny. There is a former IJ named it was Judge Arthur. Now he is a pundit that will show up every once in a while. And I think he's with either CIS or FAIR. And he was a judge at York, the detention center. And I had a client, a young lady who was maybe 19, 20 from Central America. And she was having really bad pain down in her woman areas. And she was trying to communicate this to the medical staff there at York, but no one there in the medical staff speaks Spanish. And this is a criminal detention center, but they also have a huge immigration detainee population. And I remember at the bond hearing, I was expressing my concern because she had some medical concerns in her country as well. So she had a history. And he was saying, well, the medical staff should be able to take care of her. And I said, well, I mean, no one there speaks Spanish, so it's really hard to communicate. And this was a judge who had been there for 10 or plus years. And he's like, what do you mean no one there speaks Spanish? I'm like, no one speaks Spanish. He's like, I don't believe that. And the government attorney chimed. Actually, I think it was the guard in the courtroom. And said, yeah, he's right. No one speaks Spanish down there. And Judge Arthur was aghast. And I'm like, how do you not know this? And he actually gave a very reasonable bond. She got out and she's fine now. She's healthy and being represented by Susan Bazzi in Virginia, thankfully. So not me. So she has a good chance.
Dodged a real bullet there.
But it is the medical system, and not only immigration detention, it's just in prisons, right, is almost uniformly horrible. And again, usually it's neglect and not extra procedures that are unneeded. But certainly I know Andrew Free, friend of the show, is on the case, and I'm sure we'll get a fuller understanding of what happened or is happening soon enough.
One reason why, we don't need to make things up. We don't need to blow things up that aren't necessarily true. But one reason why I don't like the brake pumping so much is because it can really disengage people. And I do want people who are listening who maybe feel the hopelessness that we were expressing earlier, who feel like there's nothing I can do. If you're hearing these stories and you're troubled, you should call your representatives. Tell them that it matters to you. The more calls like this that they get, the more likely they are to push for hearings or to investigate these claims. And if you have detention centers in your community or your state, you should also be engaging state and local representatives as well. I do think with the presidential proclamation I mentioned earlier, we've put in requests with senators and Congress people at this point, and there's just nothing we can do. And I wonder if rather than take the wind out of the sails at the time by telling everyone it was actually a very small change and not that big of a deal, if people had, really been pushed to be more engaged and to push for congressional hearings and things like that, if it might have made some small difference. So
yeah, and also just don't get caught up when we're talking about prisons. I'm private versus non-private, and
right.
I hear that a lot because the two examples I gave were both at county-run prisons or detention centers.
Yeah,
so, and I hear it a lot, and it's probably because people like Andrew Free is working a lot at these private facilities that were run by GEO and all that. And he focuses on them because they suck so bad. But trust me, it's non-public detention centers are typically, I don't know if they're as bad, worse, the same, but they're not good.
My clients pretty routinely tell me, because they often go from county to the GEO group detention center in Tacoma. And they pretty routinely tell me that the food and the conditions in general are better in Tacoma than at Yakima County Jail. So, I don't know, if we ended that GEO contract and then pumped a bunch of that money into Yakima County so that they could house them in some sort of public facility. I mean, you're right. It's not
we could just stop detaining them.
Maybe that's the solution.
Yeah.
Maybe. All right. Well, really good chatting with you. Keep your head up.
What's it?
It's going to be really hard for this coming week to be worse than the last one. So there's always that silver lining.
Oh, yeah.
All righty.
Yeah, it's funny, though. A new BIA decision just came out. I saw it pop up on my email as we were talking. So
no, thanks. Not going to read it.
All right, man.
All right. Later.
Later.